Greetings. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your interest in fitting multifocal contact lenses. And I could tell you this topic, for me, is a somewhat selfish endeavor because I'm a presbyope, surprise, surprise, and I wear multifocal contact lenses. So I'm always searching for ways to enhance performance with multifocal contact lenses. So hopefully some of the things I've learned over time with patient care and with my own life experience, we can talk about some of those learnings and hopefully benefit next time we're in the lane with the presbyope. So let's get at it. So here are my disclosures. These are all companies I've worked with as either an investigator, a speaker, or an advisor. None of this should impact the contents of this conversation. One of the things that makes fitting multifocal contact lenses fun is that it takes art, but the art is supported by science. So it's a fun combination to work both sides of the brain there. So let's start off with tackling the topic of multifocals versus monovision for the presbyopic patient who is interested in contact lens wear. And let's rely on science to help us to come up with the proper first approach when we're managing a presbyopic contact lens patient. At the early part of the 2000s, a ton of studies were done, head-to-head studies, well-designed studies, comparing patient preference for monovision versus multifocals. And virtually in every case, about 7 out of 10 patients preferred multifocals over monovision. Now, someone out there might be saying, well, you know what? That's not been my experience. And I think there's a few reasons why some people may have the attitude that flies in the face of that 7 out of 10 preference. And one of those things is the fact that those same studies revealed that although preferred, multifocal lenses do have a difficulty working well in a dimly lit environment, particularly when looking in a near object. So when you're in a restaurant environment. So what we need to do is recognize that, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because multifocals are overall preferred. But when we're in a situation, a dimly lit restaurant, for example, we need to arm patients with the information that this may be an issue and then give them the tools to manage it. So give them the idea of wearing magnifiers or using light. And everyone carries a light in their pocket now, right, with their cell phone. So that's easily accessible. There's also apps available that have magnification and light. And we always preface the patient with the notion that we want to meet most of the visual needs most of the time. So let's talk about setting the stage for success when fitting a multifocal lens on a presbyopic patient. Number one, you know the science, so that gives you the confidence to recommend multifocals over monovision because you know 7 out of 10 patients preferred that in well-designed studies. You need to make sure you understand the strengths and the challenges that come along with multifocal contact lenses, so you understand that the great freedom that comes with the multifocal contact lenses. But also, you know that in a dimly lit restaurant, you're going to need some extra light or magnification. You share that with the patients. One of my favorite epiphanies was when a patient named Bob, who was one of my favorite patients, you know, we all have certain patients that we really look forward to coming in the office, who came in to see me when he was 39 years old. And he was a soft contact lens wearer, single vision. And he came in, I said, Bob, you're doing great. We'll see you next year. And he disappeared for 4 years. And what had happened, he's a 2-diopter myope. He realized that he was having a harder and harder time seeing up close when he wore his contact lenses. But when he wore his spectacles, he could just look around his glasses to read. So he almost unwittingly dropped out of contact lenses, and he did not need to. So what I've learned to do when I had that 39 or 40-year-old in my chair who are still doing well, not having any near symptoms, I arm them with the information of what's coming, because we know presbyopia is on the horizon, but they don't. Presbyopia is not a surprise to us. So let's go ahead and be ahead of the curve and inform them that this is coming. So then when they notice that near vision symptom, they come in and ask for our care, because we tell them we have ways of managing that and we can keep you seeing well and enjoying the many benefits that contact lenses provide to you. So we're going to be proactive and we're going to fit them early. There's a tendency to perhaps, well, picture yourself running 20 minutes behind. You got 3 patients waiting for you, and you have a 42-year-old with new complaints of near vision issues, and they're wearing soft contact lenses, single vision. You're going to be tempted, perhaps, to just add a little plus to the non-dominant eye to help them get through that. The problem is when you do that again the next year and again the next year, and then they're in full-blown monovision, and then start to have problems with the monovision, because that would be what? Issues with night driving, issues with depth perception. Now, they're not going to say, Doc, my depth perception's off. They're going to say, when I pull into the garage, I hit the end of the garage before I realize it. And then, of course, the other big area in today's society is you need to be able to see at 3 distances, far away, up close, and the computer. In monovision, we only have 2 eyes. So you're only going to, you got to pick and choose which of the which 2 of the 3. So in monovision, you have to pick. Am I going to go with distance and near and leave out the intermediate? You can't leave out the intermediate, right? So what we do is fit the presbyopic patient early with multifocals, and we don't get into that big mess that we have with monovision. The final and very important step is define success for your patients with multifocal correction. There are new rules to the vision game when presbyopia comes to be part of their existence. Multiple tools are required, whether you're a contact lens wearer or a spectacle wearer, right? If you have a presbyope who wears spectacles, and in our office, we ask them, how many hours a day do you spend on the computer? If they spend 6 or more hours on the computer, we're recommending computer glasses. So now we're getting involved in multiple spectacles. Well, same deal with contact lenses. When it comes to meeting the needs of the presbyopia, we need the magnification, we need the light, we perhaps need the apps, and we need to set the expectation. The goal is to meet most of your visual needs most of the time with these lenses, but at times you're going to need other tools. So for example, if you're going to take a long night drive, wear your glasses. It's also very important to define success for yourself. When you're fitting a multifocal patient, how do you know you've gotten where you want to go? And there's a great study that I want to cite that helps us make that assessment. Jill Woods from Canada did this study and assessed objective testing with multifocals. That is, how well does the patient read the acuity chart? And subjective ratings. How do patients perform in the real world with real world tasks? Comparing multifocals to monovision. When it came to how well do they read the chart, monovision actually did better. But when you ask the patient what helps you perform your day-to-day tasks, multifocals win. So the moral of the story here is, don't let acuity readings, although they're important, don't let them drive your decision-making. Let patient subjective response tell you whether you have reached your goal or not. In other words, if patients can do what they need to do and want to do and do it comfortably, you've met your goal, no matter what acuity reading they're giving you. Okay, so how do we decide what to fit? Because we have many multifocal contact lens options for patients. And the big decision driver for me, and I imagine for you too, is the astigmatic error. That has to be managed. Where's the flinch level? When do we say we got to jump in and correct the astigmatism in addition to the distance refractive error, the spherical refractive error, and the presbyopia? There's been some studies, so I want to rely on some science to help us answer that question. Catherine Richdale did this great study. She looked at 2 different populations. I'm going to concentrate on the population cited here in the middle of this chart, which is the low astigmat, someone with a diopter or less astigmatism. When those patients did not have their astigmatism corrected, they lost about a line of acuity under mesopic conditions. So it's important to recognize that, because If you're checking acuity under photopic or high contrast measurements, you may say, oh, the acuity isn't that different. But then the patient goes out and gets in their car and drives home at sunset, and they're suffering significant visual loss. The amount, so I hope we can all agree that about 3/4 of a diopter of astigmatism is the flinch level, where we need to jump in and do something and correct the astigmatism. When we look at the numbers, some work done by Graham Young suggests that estimates approximately 1/3 of potential contact lens wearers require astigmatic correction. So a ton of people, right? And then other work has shown that astigmatism tends to increase over time. And we're talking about dealing with the presbyopic population. So it's going to be something we have to manage, and we have to manage frequently. So let's take a case here. I had a retired professor come into the office, and he has really gotten into astronomy. And he said, Doc, can you help me out? Because to look at the stars, I use binoculars, so I got to take my glasses off. But then they looked at my celestial map, and he brought in something like what you see here on this slide. And I said, I got to put my glasses back on to look at the celestial map. It's very inconvenient. What can you do to help me? This is his spectacle prescription. You see he's myopic, but has a significant amount of astigmatism, particularly in the left eye. But as you can see from the keratometry readings, it's all corneal. So when the spectacle astigmatism and the corneal astigmatism match, we celebrate. We celebrate like Tigger bouncing up and down here, because we have a ton of options. We have rigid optics with corneal GPs or scleral GPs, hybrids, and toric soft options. So what about this gentleman? What did I recommend for him? Well, many of these options involve simultaneous vision optics, distance and near light coming into the pupil at the same time. If he's going to be doing stargazing, that's not going to cut it. So we proceeded to fit him with a translating GP multifocal. Now, don't stay with me. Stay with me here, because most of our conversation in this hour is going to be about soft simultaneous vision multifocals, but there is a need occasionally where someone needs really crisp vision, and GP translating multifocals meet the call there. And so I think there's some reasons why people shy away from it, and I want to address those head on. When people come in thinking they're going to get a contact lens, they're probably expecting they're going to get a soft lens, but oftentimes sclerals, corneal GPs, or hybrids are a better solution. So how do we get them on board with this? Well, let's go to back in history to Aristotle's elements of persuasion. Number one, you need to be a credible speaker. So if you have confidence about what the right tool is for this patient, then speak, with confidence. The strength of the argument. So in other words, describe the benefits, but then also share the challenges, so there's no surprise to the patient once you endeavor on this path. And then finally, your ability to emotionally move the audience by drawing comparisons, storytelling, and basically understanding where the patient is, where they are. So let's employ 4 of these strategies when it comes to recommending a corneal GP lens for a patient. So first of all, describing the benefits. For example, you might say this lens will provide you with the vision you're looking for. Great start. But we want to let them know there may be some challenges. So there is some initial awareness of the lens. Then we used comparisons to help us communicate, but it's similar to wearing a watch or a ring to adapt to. That seems to help patients understand what we're talking about when they're talking about the physical adaptation of a corneal lens. And then finally, storytelling. The human brain is designed to hear stories, and it's a great way to teach patients what you want to share with them. And I have an example here. I've had many patients in situations similar to yours who do quite well with this approach. So that's some tips on how to get people from being confused for, wait, we're not talking about a soft lens, to a GP, and help them buy in with it, because you need their buy-in to be successful. So let's talk about corneal GPs, and specifically the basics of a translating bifocal fit. any contact lens, soft or GP, lens movement and lens centration is what it's all about, right? Soft or GP. We do have these additional concerns or issues we have to be boxes we need to check when it comes to fitting a translating bifocal, and that is seg height and lens translation. And one of the big hurdles is understanding where to put the seg, right? But when it comes to fluorescein evaluation, which some people are intimidated by that, if I got the lens centering, moving and translating like I want, I kind of don't care what the fluorescein pattern is. I only use the fluorescein pattern to help me know how to manipulate the lens to get the desired movement, centration, and translation. So let's look at seg height. Here, I think you can see pretty clearly the seg is cutting the pupil in half, so this patient's going to have distance blur. Here we have a seg that's too low, so the patient's going to have trouble accessing the seg. So how do we get the right seg height? And I stole this from a manufacturer and found this worked really well. The goal is to put the seg right below the pupillary margin. And if the lower lid, now this is an important qualifier, if the lower lid is tangent to the lower limbus, which in most people it is, if we put the seg height 1 millimeter below the geometric center of the lens, it's going to be just about where we want it. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say we have a 10-0 diameter lens. The geometrical center of that lens is 5 millimeters. If we lower that by 1 millimeter, we're putting our seg height at 4 millimeters. Usually that's going to get you where you want to go. If the lower lid is above the lower limbus, if the lower lid is above the lower limbus, that's going to push the seg height higher, so we need to put the seg height even lower, so we go down like 1.5 millimeters. If the lower lid is below the lower limbus, don't fit a translating lens because we need that lid there to help push the lens up and down gaze. Now, how does this look? The lens, again, we want that lens seg line to be right at the pupil margin. This is below that. Before I would abandon this, I would say do two things. You can look at the lens through an ophthalmoscope, standing at arm's length, and have the patient look down, and you get down along their line of vision, see if the seg line translates up into the pupil. And if it does, you don't need to have complete pupillary coverage. Just about half the pupil needs to be in the seg. You'll have good near vision. But probably the best way to do it is have the patient hold their chin in a straight ahead position as they look straight ahead. Give them the object right in front of them, and then have them lower it, holding their chin steady, and ask them to tell you when the near vision kicks in. That is the practical test. If they're able to hold that card at a comfortable angle, the seg height is fine. You only need to change it if it's an extremely low gaze. What about the arm's length distance? As we talked about, using the computer is in everybody's life right now. There's a few ways to deal with that. There are trifocal translating design options. They even have now progressive translating design options that work much like translating spectacles. I've had great success with these. And another option is, this is a patient who's in a translating bifocal, top part for far away, bottom part for reading. And these are +1 1/4 that she wears over her contacts. So she's looking through the distance part of the lens as she looks at the computer and looking through these +1 1/4. And you may be able to see there, the lower part of the lens and the spectacle lenses are cut off, so she can look under that +1 1/4 and use her regular ad that's in her translating contact lenses. Okay, let's translate away from the topic of translating lenses and talk about another patient. This is an English professor that I saw who is a myope, 43 years old, really active, a mother, plays tennis, again, a professor. She was having starting to have issues with close vision. She's already an established spherical GP lens wearer, single vision. And these are her lenses here, and these are her lens parameters. Again, distance vision's great, just having problems with her close vision. Over refraction finds she needs a +75 ad. What can we do to help her? There's There's multiple choices, but one option is particularly attractive. So let's talk about what our tools are here. We have developed over time these Aspheric GP multifocals. The very earliest iteration had back surfaces that changed rapidly in shape. As you went from center to the edge, the curve flattened quickly. So you had to fit these lenses 4 to 6 diopters steeper than K. And with that steep fitting, commonly there was corneal molding, which led to spectacle blur. Then we developed low eccentricity back surface lenses, so there wasn't nearly that rapid drop off in shape as we went from center to the edge. But we did rely on the upper lid to help hold the lens in position. Also, we could only create so much add. So we did also rely on the lens to translate up some. So as you looked into a more peripheral part of the lens, you got a little bump up in the add. But now we have the ability to manufacture aspheric curves on the front surface of the lens. So this is beautiful when you have someone wearing a single vision corneal lens and just needs an add. You can keep the back surface the same shape. You can keep the diameter the same. You just add an aspheric curve to the front of the lens. The key thing here is that centration is critical for these lenses to work well. And as you may recall from this patient that we're discussing here, her lens is centered very well. So all we had to do was change to the front surface of the lens to an aspheric surface to create add. I do have a little caution here. Sometimes the lab, when they fabricate the lens with the aspheric front surface, the center thickness will be bumped up, which can make the lens heavier and may make it fall. So I've found that if I call the lab and point this out to them, they can refabricate it into a thinner, lighter lens that centers better. As I mentioned to you, there's actually a whole host of options when we have corneal astigmatism equaling spectacle astigmatism, which fortunately is the most common scenario. So let's briefly touch on scleral multifocals. Most scleral multifocals are centered near, just like most soft multifocals are centered near, because neither of these move very much. So we need to make sure we have that center, or that near optics in the center of the line of vision. Some key considerations when considering a scleral multifocal is, where's the add? Because sclerals tend to ride down and out, so we may need to change the size of the add in order to get it into the line of vision. And of course, the stronger the add, the more important it is that it centers well. We do now, in some designs, have the opportunity to decenter the add within the scleral lens. The other big thing that I want to make sure you're aware of is that if you're fitting scleral lenses largely on irregular corneas, you may have some higher order aberrations coming into play here. So if you can fit a scleral lens on a keratoconic, for example, and achieve 20/20 acuity, and they're a low add, that's an ideal patient to consider putting into a scleral multifocal. On the other hand, if you have a keratoconic and the best corrected distance acuity you can get with a scleral lens is 20/60, and they're a high add, that's going to be a challenging scenario, and perhaps just reading glasses over that patient's scleral lens is a better option. Of course, hybrid multifocals are out there with a firm center and a soft skirt. There is some science to help us with this too. This study done in 2015 found that the duet multifocal hybrid lens seemed to provide similar visual quality outcomes as soft multifocals. So that is an option for some of your patients, and particularly attractive for the astigmat. What other things should we be thinking about when we're trying to decide which option to pursue when fitting a presbyopic patient? And the second bullet point I consider is, what are they used to, and then are they happy with it? So if they're used to a soft lens and they're relatively happy with it, you probably don't want to move away from a soft lens. On the other hand, if they're used to a soft lens and they've struggled with handling, durability, visual performance, and recurrent infections, whatever, then they're more open to the idea of considering some of these other options like corneal GPs, sclerals, or hybrids. So that's something to always think about, that you have a more accepting audience if they're having problems with whatever they're in at the time. I always factor in also safety and convenience. So daily disposables are a great option for the presbyopic patient for a number of reasons. One is presbyopes tend to have drier eyes, so they tend to coat their lenses more frequently, and therefore that may lead to problems. I tell patients dirty lenses create most contact lens complications. So if we're going to replace the lens every day, that's going to be helpful. In fact, Robin Chalmers has done some studies that showed us that daily disposable lenses are 12.5 times less likely to create problems than a re-wearable lens. So this is how I present that. So patient, most contact lens complications are due to dirty lenses. If you change your lens every day, it's not twice as good. It's not even 10 times better. It's 12.5 times less likely that you're going to suffer eye irritation. Then I pause and say, and that's a big number. And patients sometimes come to life when I say, and that's a big number. You need to put it in perspective for them to help them understand how much better a daily disposable option is in terms of safety. I don't care whether it's a silicone hydrogel or a hydrogel lens. Other work by Chalmers shows that they both perform very well. Another reason to recommend a daily disposable to a presbyope is many of the presbyopic contact lens patients I have don't need to wear the contacts all the time. So they just want them for certain activity. So they tend to be part-time wearers. And a daily disposable lens, you don't have the potential problem of a monthly lens where it's just sitting around in a case for a period of time getting nasty. So these are all reasons why presbyopes and daily disposables are a great match. Okay, let's spend the remainder of our conversation talking about tips for fitting simultaneous vision designs, which of course includes the soft lens population, but it also includes hybrids and many of the corneal GPs, as I've already outlined, and the sclerals. So a wide range of patients are going to be employing simultaneous vision designs. What tricks can we have up our sleeve to be successful? So let's look at some procedures and techniques to enhance performance. First of all, assessing the performance. How do we do that? So we're going to use our fitting guides to make our initial lens selection. And then in our office, once the lenses are applied, the patient is required to leave the examining lane. We invite them out into the reception area, not the waiting area, right? It's the reception area. Look out the window, pick up a magazine, explore their visual world. And they're doing their work for us. They're doing our work for us. So when they come back into the lane, we're going to ask them a very open-ended question. How are you doing? How are you doing with your contact lenses? What's the benefit of an open-ended question? The open-ended question gives the patient now the opportunity to take the conversation in the direction it needs to go. So, for example, if you're asking, how do you see with your right eye? How do you see with your left eye? How do you see with your right eye when you're standing on one foot? I mean, things can get really muddled very quickly. So if we say, how you doing? They might say, well, I see great far away. I'm having some trouble up close. We now know where to focus our energy. So it really cuts to the chase of where our energy needs to be devoted. Of course, when we're making our assessment of the performance with a multifocal contact lens, a simultaneous vision lens, we want a real world environment, because what's impacted? If we have the lights up, if we have them behind a phoropter, pupil size is going to be affected. And that obviously impacts the information entering through the pupillary space and getting to the retina and ultimately to the brain. So we want to mimic real world environment. Most people don't live in a dark room all day like we do. They have lights up. When we are making our lens selection, determining eye dominance is important. There's two ways to do that. One is sighting dominance, as you see here with the extended arms technique. Tell me, when you line up an object, is it lined up with the right or left eye? I think of this as being like right or left-handed. It's just how we're wired. However, work done by a number of investigators, Holden, Erickson, and Raboy, suggests that sighting dominance has very little relationship to success with monovision or multifocal contact lenses. A better way is to assess dominance using sensory testing, or plus the blur is another way it's sometimes described, where you introduce a plus powered lens, plus 1.5 commonly is what's employed, in front of one eye and then the other, and ask the patient, which bothers you more? And if you put it in front of the right eye, for example, and they say, that's what bothers me more, then that's the dominant eye, right? We always talk about the dominant eye, but what I really want to know is, what's the non-dominant eye? What's the eye that I can get away with pushing a little plus in if I need to get good near vision, and have the patient be okay with it? Which eye accepts a little bit of distance blur without too much of a problem? A real quick and easy way to do this sensory dominance testing is at the end of your refraction. You know you have best corrected acuity in each eye. And with both eyes open, just use a retinoscopy lens. Rotate it in front of one eye and then the other. But again, both eyes are open. Which bothers you more? That retinoscopy lens is a plus 150. It's a real quick and easy way to test eye dominance. I really want to encourage you to use sensory dominance testing. Then once you've determined what you want on the patient, you've had them go out in the reception area and explore their visual world. They come back in, you ask them an open-ended question, how you doing? And then you're going to assess their vision. This has been a really helpful tip that I've developed over time, and that is to have the 20/40 line isolated in the examining lane when the patient comes back in. What do you normally have projected up at the end of a room? Probably a full chart, a full acuity chart. If you have a full acuity chart with 20/20 or even 20/15 at the bottom, when the patient sits in the chair, what are they going to do? They're going to try to read the bottom line. And if they can't, they're going to be discouraged. So if we start with the 20/40 line, why 20/40? Well, in the state of Ohio, where I am, that's the minimum requirement to have an unrestricted driver's license. Another reason I like 20/40 is I'm pretty sure they're going to be able to see 20/40, and I want them to have success on the first attempt. So we start with 20/40. Oh, great, you got it perfectly. Let's go to 20/30. I don't say let's go to 20/30. I say let's go to the next line. And they read that and they go, whoa, great. Then we go to the 20/25. Wow, really good. Now, even if 20/20 is a struggle, you can say, let's go to this line. It's really small. If you can't get it all, don't worry about it. But then they get 20/20, even if they're struggling, and they feel success. So there's a little bit of cheerleading that's necessary in order to be successful and fit in multifocal lenses, as patients' brains are learning what they should be paying attention to, because they have all this information coming in. And work by Fernandez has shown that over a 15-day time frame, which is the length of his study, he saw visual acuity improve in multifocal lens wearers, where the acuity did not improve with monovision lens wearers. So while they're first being exposed to the multifocal optics, it can be a little confusing. So we have to help them through that process. In terms of measuring near acuity, I always ask them to pull out their cell phone and look at their text stream, because that's something they do all day, every day. And if we can show them they can do that comfortably, that's a big win, and they're getting encouraged about the potential for these new lenses. Other tips: don't recheck too soon. Don't make changes too soon. So if we do have a patient that we do need to implement a change in to enhance performance, we usually make one change and have them go for a week and then have them come back. But before we have them go, there's certain phrases that I always share with them, and I want to share them with you. The parting words. Number one, the visual system needs time to adapt. And we just talked about that. Fernandez's study and showed how visual acuity will improve over time. Light is your friend. We talked about that at the opening, how with simultaneous vision lenses, near vision and low light can be challenging. We arm them with the information and the tools to deal with it up front. And the phrase I always use is light is your friend. Commonly when they come back after a week or so and I say, how do you get along? And they say, well, I learned light is my friend. And they chuckle and we all have a chuckle, and it seems to really resonate with them and reminds them to employ light when they need it. And finally, these lenses are designed to work together. Any multifocal lens, a system, works better when both eyes are contributing to that visual performance. It's particularly important to share this message if you've had to push plus in one eye in the more advanced presbyope. Usually is where you'd need to employ that strategy, because there's going to be a difference in vision between the two eyes. So you need to tell the patient, don't worry about that. What we care about is how you function in your natural environment under natural conditions, which is both eyes open, in which case vision performance will be better, and it's a more accurate assessment of how they perform in the real world. Enhancing performance, if the lens isn't doing what you want, always start by making sure you have as much plus in the distance power as they'll take. These aspheric designs commonly will provide more minus power than what it's labeled. So a -2 lens might act like a -2 1/4 or -250. So I'm always generous with plus power because it's only going to help with the close vision. But if they're still having problems with the close vision, follow the manufacturer's fitting guide that tells you when to change add versus changing distance power. These manufacturers want you to be successful with their lenses, so please follow what they've figured out works for their lens based on the many, many studies they've done assessing the nuances of their design. I want to close with this. When is enough enough? Where you feel like, you know what, I've done everything I can for this patient, and they still seem to not be satisfied with their simultaneous vision multifocals. Well, first of all, make sure you've confirmed the prescription as we just discussed. And then I like to share what I call the 3 revelations. Number one, we've already talked about. I always make sure at the outset I share revelation number 1. The goal is to meet most of your visual needs most of the time. There are times when it won't meet your visual needs and you'll need other tools, is what's the inferred message here. But if you share that and they still come back and they say, you know what, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing, but you, again, have already assessed the power and you think you got the right power in there. The second revelation is, well, you may need to give up a little bit of Christmas for freedom. So sometimes when they see that balance and they realize, wow, I really enjoy the freedom, they kind of let that softer focus issue go a little bit. They accept it. But sometimes they'll come back and even after that conversation still say, I wish I could see better. And that's when I share the third revelation is, well, this is as good as it gets. And I can tell you, I've been impressed with the number of times patients have responded to this statement with, oh, okay, well, that's fine. It's fine. I just thought if it could be a little bit better, I'd like it to be better, but this works fine. So make sure that you don't make a decision against what is in the best interest of the patient. Have a conversation and get their subjective input. Thank you very much for listening. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. And please let me know what questions you might have.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. And of course, you already know we have Dr. Thomas Quinn. Thank you so much for the lecture. It was amazing. I always learn a lot from you, no matter how many times I've seen you in person. So it was very enlightening. And I'm excited to get to some questions. And the first one that just came up just a second ago was if there was any recommendations on approach to ametropic presbyopic patients interested in contact lenses. You know, they've gone their whole life with perfect vision. They hit their 40s, they can't see up close. We're all scared to death to fit them. What do you do?
Jason, it's been such a pleasure talking about this. And, you know, I'm a presbyope and I wear contact lenses, so this is something I'm really passionate about. And the ametropic presbyope is a unique character. So let's talk about that. I basically think of them as someone who's been spoiled their entire life, you know, not needing any correction. And when they start having trouble with their close vision, they want to be able to not wear glasses still because they haven't had to wear them all these years. So how do we get them over the hump? Because when we put that multifocal lens on, it will steal a little bit away from their distance vision. Because they've been spoiled, they are reluctant to accept that. So the key here is to put a lens on each eye, have them go out into the reception area for that 10 minutes we talked about, have them come back in, ask them how they're doing, and they'll invariably say, "Can't see a thing, doc." And then they read the 20/20 line. But it's not a crisp 20/20 line like they're expecting, like they're accustomed to. So this is where, with your clean hands, you reach up and take the lens off the dominant eye. And that will instantly clear up their distance vision. You give them their near card, and they can still read up close. So what you're doing is resetting the bar of expectation. So you put a lens in each eye to make it really crappy. And then you take the sacrificial lens off because you know that's not really going to stay there.
And you're the hero.
So then when you take it off, relatively it's improved. And then oftentimes that threads the needle to what you need.
No, that's perfect. That leads right into my next question from another doctor. You know, when it comes to new patient fitting, converting from single vision contacts to multifocal, how much time do you let them acclimate with the multifocals? You said about 10 minutes out in the waiting room and kind of out in the open where they're looking outside, maybe in the big waiting room or the optical. And then the question was, when do you follow up with them after that?
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit more about adaptation, Jason? Because
yeah, of course.
Fernandez did a study a number of years ago that showed it was a 15-day study. And over those 15 days, he found acuity with multifocals improved over those 15 days. With monovision, the acuity did not improve. There's definitely a learning curve, and you know, people of more mature age, we used to think their brains were hardwired. Now we realize we still got it. We can still learn. We can still pick up new skills, and that includes.
So you're saying you can teach an old dog new tricks. So we finally solved that question.
An old dog and an old person. So, so give it time. So sometimes there'll be the situation where you feel like, I got everything right. I did the distance over refraction, but the patient's still not sure at that initial fitting. Just have them go and then come back in a week or so is usually what we do. Now, some of those in the field may say, well, wait a minute, a lot of these daily disposable multifocals come in 5 lens packs. Well, we just give them two packs. So, because I don't want them to come back in 5 days. That's too soon. I try to get them at least a week before they come back.
Great answer. Next question really has to do with the recent soft multifocal toric lenses that have come on the market versus fitting a traditional gas perm, maybe front surface aspheric or back toric with front spheric multifocal option with your higher corneal cylinder patients over 3 diopters. So I guess what's been your thoughts on these multifocal torics, and would you still lean towards a gas perm with those more complex cases?
The multifocal torics we have today are really perform at a high level. I mean, when I was back in school, we used to call toric soft lenses, snowflake lenses, right? The lenses deliver consistently, and they really, I've been very impressed with that. That's fine for the low to moderate astigmats. When you get into the higher cylinder, just any mislocation of that axis is going to be problematic. And then on top of that, trying to deal with multifocal optics. So my strong recommendation is if you have someone who's a 2.5 diopter astigmat or more, go straight for the gas perm, because a study done by Longis Michaud in Canada looked at fitting moderate to high astigmats with soft torics versus GP torics. And if you start with a soft toric and then try to switch to a GP toric, you've made your job harder, because people want it to feel like it's soft toric. So if you know that a GP toric is going to be what delivers for you, jump right to that. don't go the circuitous route through a soft lens first.
Awesome. Thank you. Talking a little bit back to your lecture about translating GP multifocals versus front surface aspheric gas perms. Are you deciding one versus the other based on age? Like, do mature presbyopes run out of gas with these, these multifocal front surface aspherics, and you need a translating one to get enough ad then? Or is it more based on their needs? Like, I'm a computer user, so I need the front aspheric versus I only read books and I need high ads for, a translating design. What makes you decide one or the other?
That's a great question, Jason. And really, it's a number of things, but the big driver for me is how they're going to use their eyes. But of course, the higher the ad with a simultaneous vision design, the potential for competition is greater, the potential for challenges are greater. So if you do have a high ad and it meets the needs of the patient, the translating design is a better option. But the other piece, besides their ad and besides how they use their eyes, is that patient's individual disposition. And if they have a disposition that loves detail, I'm going to definitely go to the translating multifocal. And I think it's perhaps the most underutilized option we have with multifocal correction is that translating lens option. It's just, you just can't beat the optics that come along with that. So if you got someone with high demands, that's the way to go.
Let's talk a little bit about sensory dominance testing. I agree with you. I do lean towards that. I feel like it gives me a more accurate idea of what the true dominance is when we're talking about multifocals or disparity offset. What do you do when you have a patient who you do the sensory dominance testing on and they don't have a preference? You do the 150 each eye, you do the 2 in each eye, and they're just like, they're about the same. Do you use sighting dominance as a tiebreaker, or do you just keep adding more plus until you get an answer?
Well, let me first mention that I did an article for Contact Lens Spectrum a few years ago describing this blur tolerance test that I like to do, where both eyes are open. You got the maximum prescription in to do this behind the phoropter. And then with both eyes open, you add plus to one eye and ask the patient, tell me when it first gets blurry. When they report that, you make that note. Let's say you add plus 75. You make that note, you go back to the original starting point, do the same thing with the other eye. And if they take a lot more plus in one eye, then that's the non-dominant eye. That's the eye that's going to allow you to push plus and maybe steal a little bit away from the far vision without being problematic. Then of the series of 16 patients that I did that on, most people had very little difference between the two eyes, suggesting that for most people, it doesn't really matter which you choose as the dominant eye. But for other people, it really matters. So that blur tolerance test helps you tease that out. So the point being that if you do the blur test and there's no real strong preference, use other factors, like where does their computer sit? If it tends to sit off to the right, choose the right eye to be the near biased eye, and things of that nature.
That's great advice. Speaking of monovision, if you have an established monovision patient, you're trying to wean them off of monovision to maybe get them into a multifocal lens for better stereopsis depth perception. Are you the kind of person that tries to go, the full amount, get them all the way back to multifocal, or do you kind of wean them down and do a modified monovision kind of a situation at first?
Love that question. I most of the issues, if you try to switch someone from monovision into multifocal, particularly if they're an advanced presbyope, will be with distance vision. And most of the problems with monovision are induced by the near biased eye. So what I have had great success with is keeping the distance eye single vision and putting a multifocal in the near eye to clear up the distance vision in that near eye, and also picking up the intermediate vision, which is often the problem.
That's perfect. And then last question, before we are out of time, just your thoughts on red-green balancing, duochrome testing, and just the importance in general of being careful not to over-minus patients and make sure that that refraction is accurate as far as fitting multifocals.
That refraction is the foundation upon which we're going to build our contact lens house. It's got to be a firm foundation, a solid foundation. So as you mentioned, no over minusing. And how do we know whether we're over minusing? is if we offer them a quarter minus and they hem a haul about did it help, they're not getting that. You know, it's got to be a true difference that they appreciate. And then the blur balance too is key, and using the red-green test is a great way to accomplish that.
Dr. Thomas Quinn, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been educational, and we appreciate your insights as always. Hope you have a great night, everybody. And now we're going to head back over to the exhibit hall for some final thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.